Welcome to Yield Nerd, an educational show about how you can acquire and manage yield. Unit 2, Episode 94. This is where we start double checking our math because Unit 1 told us both the boy genius Ganesh and Kayla's parents, they cannot go wrong. They absolutely have to put all of their money into, or as much of their money they can, into Broker Bob and just sit back and relax. This thing is flawless. That is what Unit 1 said. Let's check our math in Unit 2. Well, let's first do some research on how common an IRA or a 401k is. And there is this paper by ICI, and when I looked at that, I was speechless. Only 16% of retirement age Americans, meaning 55 and above Americans, do not have an IRA. Across all ages, only 28% do not have an IRA. To say it differently, the older American is 85% likely to have an IRA. Stunning, amazing. I did not know that. And across all ages, almost three-quarters of Americans have it. This is awesome. Americans are riding along into the sunset. They are having an incredible retirement. As you may remember, just $100 becomes 625,000 100 years later. Every 10 years, your investment goes by a multiple of 10x. I showed you data. Data does not lie. This is historical real returns. So let me make sure, based on those acceptable facts, if you're in doubt, you can look at the previous episode. This is proven data from history. Let me put this data together. I'm just kind of laying this out in my little, scrap sheet of paper. Every 15 years, history from 1928, you would have had a 5x improvement. The last 20 odd years is even more stunning. Every 10 years from 2007, your investment would have gone up by 10x. Absolutely amazing. So I just want to make sure I wrote it down properly. Any investor who had an IRA 10 years ago is worth 10 times more today than they were 10 years ago. Seems like that is what the data says. And so let me make sure I restate it again. Since 84% of Americans own a retirement account, 84% of Americans in their 60s should be 10 times more wealthy than 84% of Americans in their 50s. And 84% of Americans in their 50s should be 10 times more wealthy than Americans in their 40s. Isn't that what the data says? Please challenge me if I'm wrong. Please go to the source data and look at it for yourself. And you're welcome, says Bob the broker. And now we're going to go into the actual data one more time because, I'm in the habit of double checking. Blame me. Average net worth of Americans by age, education, race. I just went to age because if 84% of Americans have something, the rest of the stuff should not matter. You don't even need an education. You could be whatever color you want. You just buy $100, wait for 10 years, it becomes 1,000. 84% of you are doing it. This is flawless. So I went back and looked at that paper. And here is what it really shows. Yes, the older the American, each color here is a decade. The older the person is, the richer they are, except it is not even close to 10x. It is more like 20%. So every decade, an individual becomes wealthier by 20%. You sit there and go, wait a second. I thought they were supposed to get wealthier by 1,000%, not 20%. What's happening? And there is this old man who has been ranting about this for a while. I don't know if you recognize this old man, some Charlie Munger something. And he said, take every retirement fund, take every index fund, take every mutual fund. The real person getting rich, according to Charlie Munger, don't blame me, is Bob the broker and Bob the wealth advisor, not you. And Charlie Munger goes on to elaborate. Feel free to read that article. Very, very interesting article. And Charlie Munger's point leads me to the third unit, which is the gold rush and history and lessons from there. Quick quiz for you. Who had the lowest risk and the greatest odds of making money during the gold rush? Number one, was it the early prospector who went there and panned for gold? Was it the state that opened it up and said, come to our state and start digging? Don't worry about the environmental catastrophes, we'll clean it up, but hey, come spend money in our state and we'll take care of it? Or was it the miner who, after the prospector said this is where there is gold, the miner goes deep down? Were they the ones who had the lowest risk and the greatest odds of making money? Or was it someone else? Tick tock, tick tock. The answer is someone else. Guess who really had the lowest risk and the greatest odds of success? It was the person who made the jeans, Mr. Levi Strauss, thank you. The person who made shovels, you look up who made the shovels. The person who made the sandwiches, and the answer is pretty simple. Whether you win or lose, whether you found gold, you didn't find gold, you wore jeans, you used a shovel, you ate sandwiches. So the perfect way to win, at least during the gold rush, was to not take the high risk, but to take the transactional fees. And so now the question comes from me, the cynic, and apparently Charlie Munger as well. Who has the least risk and guaranteed returns from your retirement cookie jar? Turns out it is Broker Bob, who goes on to buy this really nice car. Looks very good there, Broker Bob. Also, the wealth managers and fund managers are making out really well. They don't care whether you win or lose, they have management fees coming out. And oh, by the way, the government does make taxes on this. And so the guaranteed returns and the least risk are not you, the yield nerd, assuming you did a 401k or an IRA, it's someone else. And so then we dive deeper into taxes. And let me lay my case out. Here is debt in the United States. We've beaten the living daylights out of it. From 1980 to today, debt increased by 30x or 3,000%. If debt increased by 30x and GDP increased by 30x, we would have no problems. What do you think happened to the GDP? Did it increase? Well, of course, GDP increased. GDP increased by 10x from 1980 to today. So if debt increased by 30x and GDP only increased by 10x, what happened to the debt to GDP ratio? Very simple, back of the paper napkin math. Debt to GDP went up by 3x. Instead of owing 30 cents on the dollar, our country now owes 120 cents on the dollar of GDP. What does that do? If you're a family and you're making a dollar and you owe $1.20 because of the spending you're doing, what would you do to pay off that debt? A family would say it's very simple. We're going to go get a second job to make extra money to start paying off this debt. Okay. And we're also not going to go to the theater 3 times a month. We're going to cut our spending there. And we can go to our parents and say, you know, that $100,000 you were going to give me after you pass, can you give me 50 of that 100 now? I kind of need to pay this debt off. If you're a household, maybe you do that. If you're a country, what are the equivalent options? You can't go get a second job. You need to increase GDP. That is one way to do it. Maybe AI will increase our GDP so much that the debt to GDP ratio will magically be fixed. I don't know. We could reduce your spending and we could say we can no longer afford this much on healthcare, we can no longer afford that much on defense, and so on. But remember, we have to decrease it by 3x to get back to one on one parity with 1980. And we could also increase taxes. Those are the three choices: increase GDP, decrease spending, go ask your parents for early inheritance. Well, you can't ask your parents for early inheritance, except you're going to tax whoever is here more in the next decade. Well, let's look at taxes because there is a little bit of fun going on there. What do you think the top dollar tax has been in the United States since 1900? We went from 1% to 3% in the first 50 years. And this is the regular marginal income tax. And then the government said, gee, I wonder if I can add this thing called a surtax. And look at that beautiful surtax. It went from 6% to 80, 90% for the top bracket. And I did not believe it. I had to check it and check it and check it again. So if you lived in the United States during the war, the way the war was funded, aside from war bonds, was to tax the living daylights out of the last dollar of the highest earners, 70, 80, 90%, and say, well, we need it, we need it, we need it. And then, came the great tax relief, I suppose. Instead of the surtax, people said, why don't I just make it the base tax? That went on for a little bit, 1960s, 1980s, and after 1980s, we are now allegedly in a better era where the regular tax on the highest earners are close to 33%, except if you thought the surtax went to zero, you would be wrong. Even now, we still have some surtaxes. They just are called something else. But bottom line is we are swimming at 38, 39% on the top dollar. And so the marginal tax looks more like this. It was this astoundingly high number early on. It is still at 40%, but go back to the philosophy of the country. You can't increase the GDP by pushing a magic button. Left to me, I would say, even if you had a magician, and Ganesh, the boy genius, this is for you. If you're 20 or 25, and my son is too young for me to give this advice, if my son were to be 25 and he asked me, Dad, should I put money now pre-tax and pay taxes later? I would tell my son, hey, you know what? When the later comes, there isn't any magic wand to increase GDP by 3x. I don't know how we're going to come together and decrease spending by 10x. Neither one of those is going to happen. My humble opinion, you do you. Over the next 10 years, 15 years, it doesn't matter which party is in power. The easiest weapon, unfortunately for you and I, is to increase taxes. And if that happens, and you think you're being so smart in deferring your taxes by putting money in a traditional IRA or traditional 401k, saying, I'm putting it pre tax, I'll just pay later. You do you. I would tell my son, don't do that. Now let's go back to the question asked by our favorite friend. We are going to go into Unit 3 and answer the question from Mr. or Miss Visitors Welcome in great detail. Again, welcome back. Unit 3 of episode 94. We're going to pick up where we left off and answer that question from our subscriber. Visitors welcome, who says, hey, how about that Roth IRA? How should one think about it? And again, I'm going to share my opinion. You do your own research. Don't take my word for it. I am not a wealth management advisor. And some days I'm happy I'm not. Okay, first things first, Mr. or Miss Visitors, welcome, ma'am or sir. I tip your hat for having a Roth IRA, and I'm hoping you've been investing for a while. How wonderful. You are way ahead of me. I want to share my story with you. I put all my savings in my 20s towards buying a condo. Hey, that tripled in 8 years, so I'm very happy about it. I spent most of my 30s dumb as a sack of rocks when it comes to investing. I did not invest. True story. From my mid 30s into my late 40s, I spent that time in creating my own software company, and eventually I sold it. It worked out very well for me. Again, I did not invest. I came very late to this game. No Roth IRA, none of that. My first stock buy was 5 years ago. My first bond I bought 18 months ago. I did have a wealth manager for 3 weeks. I am 53 years old. Yep, I'm old. I love the Roth IRA. I love your idea. I think you're doing a great job in picking that. That's my opinion. You do you. As long as you're only putting amounts in there that you do not need before age 59.5, the Roth IRA seems very interesting. You're paying taxes now. You're not deferring taxes to a future period where you have no idea what the taxes are going to be. And left to me, I would think taxes are going to be higher later in the years. And as for asset allocation, And I'm coming to your question. As for asset allocation, here are my thoughts. If I did not have to worry about taxes when I withdrew, here is what I would do. I would not buy any munis. Who cares about the tax advantage? Doesn't mean anything to you. They pay a lower yield anyway. I would probably put 70% of my allocation on value equities as long as they strictly adhere to the criteria that I believe in. You do you. I have some prior episodes on value investing. That is what I would use as my guide. And I would take the other 30% and put it on high dividends, again, because dividends are not taxed in a Roth IRA. And I would be very reluctant, however, to buy anything in terms of equities for the next 90 days. And I have my own reasons, November 17th, ding, 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 being one of them. And so for the next 90 days, I am sorry, I have a broken drum and I'm going to keep hitting it. For the next 90 days, I would continue to buy short term treasuries. Whether or not there is a tax advantage, I would preserve my capital. If you're reading the headlines, you can see how the speaker and the government in power, how there is or is not a lack of collaboration. I can't imagine us having a very clear deal, in terms of spending anytime soon. So I would T-bill and chill on even a Roth IRA in the short term. I'd like to see a deal on spending reached between the two parties. I'd like some clarity on global tensions. I have no idea where any of that is going to go. Or, if the market crashes and burns by 20, 30%, I would go buy value stocks and put my strategy in play. Until then, I will just T-bill and chill, even on a Roth IRA. I will show the tax-free curves. I will show the pre-tax curves, rather. Having said that, my personal asset allocation would not change even for a Roth IRA. Having said that, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. I may be correct by accident. I don't know. You do your own research, and thank you for watching Yield Nerd.